Hello everyone. In the previous video, we looked at some of the basic features of SAP Open Connectors. In this video, we'll switch gears and look at HL7 FHIR. We will also look at the various services from EPIC and how developers can use these services to design and develop their applications. So what is HL7 FHIR? So it's a relatively new standard that defines how healthcare information can be exchanged. So when I say healthcare information, this includes clinical and administrative data. And also when I say relatively new standard, it's been in the market for about 7, 8, or maybe even more than that years. So this is a standard that was created by the HL7 organization. HL7 stands for Health Level 7 organization. What this allows us to do is it allows us to exchange data to be available to those who have a need to access it. So this information sharing can be done by a variety of means, by documents, messages, and RESTful interfaces. Now, why do we need FHIR? So one is it makes it easy to provide healthcare information to anyone who actually needs it. So your healthcare provider might need your health information. You may be taking care of your loved ones, and so you may need their healthcare information. So anyone that needs that information, who has a valid need for it, so it makes it easy to gain access to that healthcare information. And you can also access this healthcare info on a variety of devices as well. And then it also makes application development a lot easier. So this last line I want to focus on. This last line about easing application development is really important to IT folks and software companies. So if you've been working in the computer field for a while, then you're used to making REST calls to external endpoints. You're also used to retrieving the data in JSON format. You're also familiar with the OAuth flow. Now imagine if we can do all the same thing, all of this with healthcare information. It will make life definitely easier if you're building a client application. So another term that we need to be aware of is a FHIR resource. So what is a FHIR resource? So when it comes to healthcare data, the data is broken down into a variety of categories: patients, lab results, insurance claims, observations, and so on. Now each of these categories is represented as a resource in HL7 FHIR. Now what you can do is when you're building an application, you can build an application based on a single resource, or based on your specific use case you can also have a combination of different resources. For example, patients, practitioner, and observation. You can combine all these resources and build your application. Now, what is a FHIR server? So there are multiple FHIR compliant APIs. So this service is offered by a variety of companies, and what it allows us to do is rapidly exchange data. Now, before we jump into the production FHIR services, we can use sandbox FHIR systems with test patient data. So EPIC has quite a few sandbox systems that we can use, and these sandbox systems come with some test patient data. So this is a really good place for us to start to gain access to patient data and see how things are working there. Now, API specifications, the way you access the resources on the FHIR server is by making RESTful calls. So if this is probably very familiar to you. So if you have to do a read operation, so this is fairly straightforward. You do a get, so you have the base URL for the sandbox system, or maybe the production system. Then you ask for the resource that you're interested in. So it could be a patient, it could be observation, or practitioner, what have you. And then because this is a read operation, then you specify the ID of that resource. So if it is a patient, you specify the ID of the patient. Then this would give you the information about the patient. You can also do a search operation, again very similar. So you have the base URL of the sandbox system, the resource that you're interested in, and then the search params. So you can have a query param with the name of the patient, where they live, stuff like that. Now you can also do a create operation. So this is going to be a post method. You have the base URL pointing to the base URL slash resource. I guess the resource is missing here. So you would have to the URL would be the base URL slash patient, and then if you're going to create a patient entity, you would have the message payload as well. Now, FHIR security. So FHIR itself is not a security protocol. But it does have some guidelines. So you must use SSL to transfer data. When using OAuth, you also need to use the current best practices for OAuth and so on. So if I go into the FHIR website itself, you can see that the very first line, it says that it's not a security protocol, but then it gives you like a whole list of items like guidelines as to how to manage security. So when using OAuth, they want you to use like the best current practices for OAuth. So when you're using OAuth, there is this concept of the scope. And what scope does is it limits the amount of access that is granted to the client application, to the access token. And by definition, since the client application uses the access token, so the client application, you can limit the amount of access. So there is this clinical scope syntax right here. So it follows a specific format. So here in the left side, you have the patient level scope, the user level scope, and the system level scope. When you talk about patient level scope, then you're talking about accessing specific data about a single patient. And then when you're talking about user level scope, you're allowing access specific data that a user can access. So this is how the scope syntax would look like. So let's say the goal for you is to read and search all observations. Observations is a resource about a patient. So the patient is the patient level scope. So you would put in the patient here, slash, and then there is the slash right here. And then the resource type that you're interested in is the observation. So here is the observation, and then you're interested in read and search. So RS stands for read search. Now, if you want to manage all appointments for which an authorizing user has access, then these user level scope is the user, appointment is the resource, and you want to do all operations CRUDs. Okay, so now jumping into the EPIC App Orchard. So we can create an app within the EPIC App Orchard. So in the EPIC App Orchard, developers can learn about EPIC's API. So what you can do is create an account there, and then you can create an app. Building an app is fairly simple, so we'll go through the process of building an app right now. And before we do that, I'll also show you some of the API specs here as well. So if I've already have a already have an account in EPIC, but if you don't have one, go ahead and create an account in the EPIC developer apps. So if I go into API specifications, so this list, so on the sandbox system, you can try out different APIs right here. So let's say we are interested in the patient resource. So if I scroll down here, it's listed alphabetically, which is good. So I can go down to the patient resource right here. The patient resource, let's do a read. So we know the syntax for the patient read. If I go back to my slide deck right here, so the read operation would be the resource and then the ID. So if I go here and try it out, you can see that it's doing a get. So this is the base URL, and then this is the resource right here, and then we are putting in the ID, and the ID is right here. You can also have a look at the raw request right here. So it's doing a get, the base URL right here, the resource right here, and then the ID. And I can try it out, and you can get the data. And you can also see that it's using some kind of a bearer token to authorize yourself. So for the authorization part of it, and you can get the data. Now, if you scroll down here, so you can also see at some stage there is a link to a practitioner. So if you read about this, it talks about what this patient resource does. But you can see that there is a link to a practitioner resource. So from here, let's say you wanted information about the practitioner, then you can follow this link and get the practitioner's information as well. So if I go back to my API list, and if I go to practitioner read, so I can follow that link here, and then I can do a get on the practitioner and get information about the practitioner here as well. And we can do create or search or whatever we want on any of these resources. So let's go ahead and build an app in EPIC. And like I said, it's fairly straightforward. So I go in, since I already have an account in EPIC, I can go into build apps, and you're greeted with this screen right here with the create button. Initially, you won't have any apps. So let me go ahead and say create. So for the name, I'll give it Hello World. And then for the audience, I'm going to select patients as my audience. So here I have quite a bit of resources that I can use. And the resource that I'm going to be interested is, let me search for the patient resource. So if I can choose the patient read, I'll be interested in that. Maybe also the observation for the patients, so I can get the vitals for the patient, and maybe also a search for the labs as well. So patient resource read, and then observation read, and then observation search as well. Now it's prompting me for a redirect URI. So for the redirect URI, what I can do is I can select this. This is my, our end goal is to integrate this with SAP Open Connectors. So we want to redirect this to the Open Connectors, SAP Open Connectors. So this is the redirect URI for the Open Connectors. So I can put the values in here. I don't need the HTTPS because it's already in here. Now the EPIC app allows you to add multiple redirect URIs, but in our case we are only dealing with the SAP Open Connector. So just the SAP Open Connector redirect URI you can put in here. So I'll put all these values in the video description, so you can use this if you're creating an app in App Orchard. Now what you can do is, this is a confidential client because we can keep the client ID secret, client secret confidential in the SAP Open Connectors. So I can select this SAP as confidential client, and then I can generate a secret. So now we should get access to the Sandbox client secret key. Say OK. Let me go ahead and save this. So I'll just put it in my notepad right here. And what I can also do is I'll store this as a hash. Now, and then I can save. So let me go ahead and save this. So once I save, I also get a client ID. So right now our app is still in the Sandbox environment. So I'll just copy the non-production client ID. So let me go ahead and put that here as well. Okay, so we have everything ready. Now there are quite a few sentences here. I'll just say SAP Open Connector. I don't need a thumbnail. Terms and conditions, I'll say HTTPS www.sap.com. I don't even know if you need to fill this in if you're just using it for Sandbox. So, but just I'm just putting some values. I'm not going to go through the questionnaire. There's a whole bunch of questions that I need to answer. I accept the terms and use of OpenEPIC. Okay, so I'll select that. And at this moment, I'll just say that I'm ready for Sandbox. At this moment, the app is created and it's ready for Sandbox. So if I go in here, I should have the same values that I selected. I have the non-production client ID. I've got all the values here. I've selected these values right here, so which is good. Now let me switch to Postman. So what I want to do in Postman is because to make the call to the resource, I need to start the OAuth flow and get the access token. And I just want to make sure that I can do that. So here in my environments, I already have an environment with all these values, but I'll make a duplicate one of this. So let me call this, I'll call this YouTube. Now, so the base URL, we are using this sandbox right here, DSTU2, and this is the base URL for that. So I don't have to change this. All these values I'll put on the description of the video, except for the client ID and the secret, because that you don't need. So here I'm going to change the client ID. For the client ID, I'm going to use the client ID we just got, which is going to be 44 something. And then as far as the client secret is concerned, that also can be changed. And this is going to be this client ID, client secret right here. So I can save this. So the authorization URL and the token URL, they're going to remain the same. You can get these values from the EPIC website, or I'll just post it in the group description, in the video description also. So you can just get these values. So the base URL, the authorization URL, and the token URL, you can get from the EPIC website, but I'll post it on the video description. And then the redirect URL that we used, this is the one for SAP Open Connectors. I'll post this in the video description as well. Okay, so now we have everything looking good. So if I go into my collections right here, so I go into my collections, the only thing I need to change is I need to make sure that I use the YouTube environment. So that's the environment that I want to use. Just if I hover around this, this is 744. That's the value that I want to use. And then the client ID is GP something. Okay, so this is correct. Yeah, so at this time we can go ahead, click on Get New Access Token. So this should start the OAuth flow. So note that it's redirecting me to the EPIC's homepage. So here I can put in a user from the Sandbox system, and for this I can go to EPIC's Sandbox and see if I can pull in EPIC, and I can go into the documentation, go into Sandbox test data. And you see that there are quite a few users here. I'll take the first one, and FHIR Camila and EPIC1. So I will log in with that user. So FHIR Camila EPIC1. Sign in. Now, because when we created the app, we did not answer the questions. This is going to give us some warnings. So here you can see that the app developer has not submitted to us how they plan to use your data. So we can simply say continue. We didn't answer any of the terms of use questions either, but we can just say continue for now. Now we are looking at the patient and also like the observation resources. So it's asking if we want to give it access. Yeah, let's give it access for 1 week. Say allow access. And this should complete the OAuth flow. So here the OAuth flow is complete. So I can, yeah, and this is the token I want to use. So really good. So we were able to get the OAuth flow working and get the access token. And now we can make calls to the resources. So this works fine. Now what we can do in the next session is go ahead and have this inside of SAP Open Connectors. And if I look in my console, I will see that there's a whole bunch of calls that were made. And the last call is right here, and here is where I get the response body. And this has my access token right here. And you can see for the scope, I have the patient scope, observation read, and then the patient patient scope. I have the patient.read. This is the resource patient, so yeah, everything looks good right here. And here is my access token, and this is what I need to pass in. I mean, if I was going to make a call through Postman, but what I want to do is I want to use SAP Open Connectors, and before that, I should have, if I go back to my calls here, and here I should have gotten the code, and this is the code that I used to exchange it for the token right here. So here, my previous call, you see I have the code right here, and this is what you exchange it for the access token. Okay, so in the next session, what we'll do is we'll use SAP connector to make this OAuth to flow call, and then maybe create like a resource to read the patient and maybe the observation data. Okay, sounds good.